I am afraid that the church today is falling victims to one of the oldest warnings in the entire Bible geared toward the people of God. Do not become like the world. Do not enmesh yourself in the ways of the nations. Do not get yourself into idolatry. Now that sounds really far-fetched. How in the world are we doing idolatry? We're not casting graven images and bowing down before golden calves like you see in the thumbnail to this video is a little bit satire-ish of a huge megachurch assembly bowing before a golden calf. You're not going to see it exactly like that. But I want to dive into 6 things in the Bible that have to do with idolatry and what that can look like in the church today, because I think it is happening. It is just far more subtle, but just as damaging and devastating as it's ever been. So the first thing we're going to look at is, where does idolatry come from in the Bible? The second thing we're going to look at is, how does idolatry express itself in the Bible? What are its forms and functions? What are its purposes? And the third thing is, what does that really look like in the church today? And I'm going to integrate some of that as I go. So where do idols come from in the Bible? This is very, very important for us to understand our current situation. Idolatry in the Bible almost always comes from the outside. When they're slaves in Egypt, there are other gods. When they come into Canaan, there are other gods. They're always tempted to take on the ways of the nations around them. When you think about their situation, going from Egypt as slaves, an agrarian society of just basically herding people, of herding animal herders, to going into Palestine, where, if you remember when the 12 spies went in, they said there are these great clusters of grapes and all this produce and all this harvest. Giant must live in the land. We are like grasshoppers before them. When they get into the land of Canaan, they become agricultural people, not just herdsmen, but people who are planting, people who are farming. And it would be very, very tempting to look at your predecessors and say, how did they farm this land so well? Exactly what did they do? Well, they worship Baal, the god of the storm. They worship Asherah. And as the seasons rolled on and as these two fertility gods interacted, it brought fertility to the land. And so if you worship these gods, you will have fertile land. You will have plenty to eat. And you remember, they don't have grocery stores. They don't have stock shelves and things to go to get food that's even out of season like we have today. If your crop doesn't make it, you may well be destitute. God's message is, trust me in all of that. But the world's message is, hey, there are really some other ways to go about this. It's always an attempt to become like the world. It's always an attempt to co-opt the ways of God with the ways and the principles and priorities of the nations. It is such a constant temptation. We have to always be on guard about it. The second thing we have to look at are the function of idols in the ancient world. God clearly prohibited this in the first and second commandment in the 10 Commandments, Exodus chapter 20. The first commandment is, you will have no other gods before me. The second commandment is, you are to have no graven images of anything above or below, nothing at all. You serve the Lord your God and serve him only. And what you see in Exodus, as you move on to chapters 32 to 34, when the golden calf is presented, you can see that the Hebrew people are looking for a visible representation that explains past experience. They say, when they raise up, they throw all the gold in the fire and they raise up this golden calf out of the fire and they put it before the people. They say, these are your gods who brought you out of Egypt, and they worship. They are clearly trying to have a visible manifestation of explaining past events through things that their own hands have made. It's very foolish. It is very silly. It just moments before, the people at the bottom of the mountain, the very people who made this idol, were begging and pleading for God to relent because the mountain was shaking and there was fire and smoke. And then they're like, well, let's just make a god and just say he did it, because this is another very important point when it comes to idols. If you read Exodus 32 through 34 with the golden calf, it came out of a tremendous lack of patience on the part of the people of the time of God. Moses had been up on the mountain for a very long time. They were growing very restless, very impatient. They wanted answers now. They wanted visible representation now. They didn't want to have to wait. They didn't want to have to do it on God's timeline. And that's one of the things we're going to see over and over in this conversation is idolatry is spiritual adultery. That you're cheating on God. You are co-opting his ways and trying to wrestle things around through your own means, and it's not faithfulness. So the first thing is that you are attributing the acts of God to things that your own hands have made. You are seeking a visible representation to explain the past salvific actions of the Lord, but putting it on your own terms. You know, church can do this very same thing. Try to explain away the magnificent acts of God in the past through things other than God. You could say, well, these are the gods who brought you out of Egypt. You could say, well, if we just continue in the tradition of our ancestors, of our elders, and just do things as they did things, then everything would be okay. If we could just get back to the 1950s and 60s, everything would be okay. If we could just be hyper legalistic, everything would be okay. It's like, well, maybe when things were going well, it was because God was blessing it, not because you had the perfect paradigm to pull this off. Like, why not attribute the amazing things of the past to the power of God rather than to our plan and our paradigm. And like them, these things can so often come out of impatience. We are so tired of waiting. We take things into our own hands, and that's not faithfulness. The second thing where idols have a role is in blending the secular and the sacred in ways that lack complete discernment. We see this in Isaiah chapter 44, 14 through 20, where Isaiah gives this condemnation. It is just cuts you right to the heart, where it talks about an idolater. And he says he cuts down the cedars, and perhaps he took a cypress or an oak, and he left it grow amongst the trees. And verse 15, it is used as fuel for burning. Some of it he takes and warms himself and kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it and makes an idol and bows down to it. Half of the wood he burns in the fire. Over it he prepares a meal. He roasts his meat and eats his fill. And he warms himself and says, I am warm, I see the fire. And from the rest he makes an idol, his god. He bows down to it and worships. He prays to it and says, save me, you are my God. They know nothing, these idols. They understand nothing. Their eyes are plastered over. They cannot see, and their minds are closed. They cannot understand. No one stops to think. Half of it I used for fuel for my fire, and baked coals on it, and roasted my meat, and I ate. And the other half he makes God out of it. This just completely blends the stomach and the flesh with God-given passions and desires. It takes our sacred-driven needs and attempts to fill them with secular principles of fleshliness and worldliness and ungodliness. Habakkuk said it this way in Habakkuk 2, 18 through 20. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For one who makes it trust in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let the whole earth be silent before him. There is no comparison. And yet the church wants to make idols out of everything. But they are lifeless. They are silent. They have no breath in them. Tradition has no breath in it. Legalism has no breath in it. Progressivism has no breath in it. Seek the Lord, be faithful to him. The third thing is probably the most difficult. It's the most direct. It's just literally bowing down and worshiping a hunk of stone, as we've talked about. We don't do this literally, but we do it very subtly, and we have to be very careful. And what this comes down to is anything we put before God becomes an idol. You see this when churches refuse to seek God and instead seek their own ways. You see this whenever church leadership bows into influence and money rather than into what is truly right. Or leadership bows into who's going to complain rather than what is absolutely morally precedent. Like, this is a huge issue when churches are led by the easiest complainer and without any set conviction on the part of the leadership to pursue a God-given vision and direction, come what may, hell or high water, because we know this is what pleases God. The church can be absolutely hijacked by the worship of complainers and anxiety-ridden people. There's also a desire about the future, for us to have a vibrant future. And we want to take that into control in our own hands because there's so much worry if we don't think the future is going to be a good future. And if it doesn't seem like God's timing is good and our patience is poor, like Exodus 32 and the golden calf, waiting for Moses to come down the mountain, it can seem in an expedient microwave society just to do something on your own, just to jump out, just to launch out. A lack of waiting on the part of leadership in church to make decision and governance or pastoral care, a lack of patience and waiting can absolutely be idolatry. It's trying to find your hope in something other than God. It's like saying, well, God hasn't shown up yet and we need to make a decision like yesterday. Well, that's fleshliness. That's worldliness. Why do you have to make a decision like yesterday? Maybe God is having you wait to test your patience. Maybe God's having you wait to test that he has something other in store, that it's going to not come till tomorrow or the next day. And you're going to have to show that you are not willing to move. You are not willing to step. You are not willing to make a direction until God makes it clear. Because that's faithfulness. Remember, in all of this, idolatry is spiritual adultery. When we cheat upon God, we are committing adultery. When we don't follow God's ways, we are committing adultery, and idolatry is its most obvious form. In Judges chapter 8, Gideon's about to just be done, and they're like, well, at least leave us with something. And he takes some earrings and he makes a golden ephod from them, and he gives that to them, and they begin worshiping it. And it says in Judges 8:27 that they prostituted themselves with this act of worship, with this idolatrous thing. This is idolatry. It's spiritual adultery. And the question the church must ask is, what does true spiritual faithfulness look like to God? What does congregational spiritual faithfulness look like to God? What does ministerial and church eldership and pastoral care faithfulness really look like to God? Because if we do not pursue that, we are compromising. The fifth thing is when we have a deep and profound need to have physical representations of invisible things. Again, going back to Gideon's ephod, we need something to hold on to. We need something tangible. What does this look like in church today? Well, it's like sometimes in church, the spiritually immature need visible representations and reminders of invisible faith things. You get this when it's like traditions crop up about the way that the auditorium looks. That's not even a scriptural thing, the auditorium, but let's say that it is. And it's like, well, you got to put the thing over the crackers, or you got to leave this here, or the front's got to say, do this in remembrance of me, or you always have to have a Bible on this, or there's got to be an American flag over on this corner. Don't touch my stuff. Don't move my cheese, because then I get really anxious and I don't like anxiety. And the sixth and the last thing, and this may be the most important, goes back to the second commandment, where he says, don't make any idols to worship or serve them. The church must think about who and what the church is serving. Okay? Because when you identify who or what you are serving, you are identifying potential idols. If you, unlike what James has to say, are trying to serve the rich and trying to appeal to the rich and the influential, that is idolatry, because you are trying to serve something other than God. You are putting other people in priority to what it is that God truly wants. You don't need to prioritize or placate the rich if you're truly trying to seek God and make God happy, because they can either get on board or they don't, but you don't care because you're doing what's right. We can serve money. We can serve power. We can create and serve our own congregational or denominational brand. There's all kinds of ways that we serve things that are other than God at the expense of serving God at our very, very best. God deserves our very, very best. Just like the Ten Commandments say, He is the Lord our God who brought us out of Egypt. Therefore, there's some things He expects from us. Don't have anyone before me. Not the rich, not the powerful, not the influential, not the politician, not the political party, not the nation, not anything else before God. And we could talk a long time about nationalism and patriotism as being idolatrous in the church today, because it is absolutely rampant. The prophets had a lot to say about this. Jeremiah in Jeremiah 10:14-15 calls idols worthless and false. In Jonah 2, he calls them absolutely empty. In Isaiah, he says that those who turn to idols in Isaiah 42:17 will be absolutely turned back into shame. If the church is being turned back into shame today, maybe it's because we're idolatrous people. Maybe that's the natural consequence of putting things before the Lord, is to be in a state of depreciation, is to be in a state of decline. You know, I heard someone say the other day that it was kind of brutal, but I'm like, oh, that cuts me right to the heart. Maybe our churches are not reproducing disciples because we're not disciples worth reproducing. Like, that really hurts. That was Curtis Sargent who said that. And I was just dumbstruck by that. Like, am I? And he asked, are you a disciple who's worth reproducing? Are you a part of a church that's reproducing? If we had more churches like your church, would the world be a better place? Would God be able to reach the nations more effectively? Or would you just be in your own little enclave doing all your own little stuff, not concerned about what God told us to do? Who are you serving? And if your church is just empty, and if it's void, and if it's not coming up, then maybe idolatry is part of that. Maybe we're worshiping and serving things that are not God first. Let us not attribute the past works of God to things other than God Himself, not to our tradition, not to our approach, not to that old minister we used to have who was so amazing, he was so pastoral, and his sermons just got us every single time. You know what? He was not as perfect as you think he was. It just wasn't. Nostalgia is an amazing thing. Probably I'm not trying to put anybody down, probably an amazing person, but with time, things just seem to often have a better recollection. So I just want to end with this thought. What is the cure for idolatry, which is spiritual adultery? It's faithfulness. The cure is faithfulness. What would it take for you to be absolutely faithful to God in all things? What would it take for your church to be faithful to God? What would it take for your church leadership to make decisions that are aligned with the will of God, to not placate anybody, but to do what's right and to be focused, because anything else is spiritual adultery. It's not about get the next big name preacher. It's not about get a bigger budget. It's not about get a better building. It's not about getting things whatever. It's like, seek God in all things. Do not compromise yourself in any way. In the Old Testament, idolatry came from the nations. The New Testament also came from the nations. And it came from when the blending of the Jews and Gentiles in the Christian church came about, one of their big questions was, how do we get along with ex-pagan idolaters? So if you read Acts 15, that's really the big question. Acts 10-15, big question. How do you bring Gentile ex-pagan idolaters into the church in a way that doesn't compromise the cleanliness of the Jewish Christian people of God. So read Acts 15, read the 3 or 4 rules there at the end of the Council of Jerusalem. No, strangled animals, no blood in the meat, no sexual immorality. All those things had to do with idolatry. They're trying to keep God's people clean. And the leadership of God's people need to be about keeping God's people pure, need to be about they need to be about keeping God's people clean, about not integrating the ways of the world into the assembly of the saints. And, we're going to look different. We're going to sound different. It's not going to be the same. And there's such a push for relevance that we have this push for relevance, this push for attractional church has so compromised our message that we become irrelevant to the very people we think we're being relevant to. We're trying to become as much like them as possible without compromising a message. But you can't do that. You can't continue to try to get closer and closer to the very people you're trying to change. You're trying to change them to become more like you, but you're trying to change you to become more like them, to get them to become more like you, and it's not going to work. That's going to fail from the start because you're losing your foundation. It's never worked this way, so do not try to do that. And again, I like to say in these videos, for myself first and foremost, if there's anything I need to repent of in this, I pray that I will do it. I pray that I will see it clearly. And so appreciate you watching this. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. But if nothing else, just hit the thumbs up and let YouTube know that you're liking this so it'll show it to more people. And watch another video or two. There's some great videos on the channel. We'll show some here on the screen that you can click on and choose from. But anyway, love you all lots, and we'll talk again soon.